All right. Well, with that, I am going to jump in as we have people continuing to join. As I noted to those who joined from the top, welcome to Represent Women's latest edition of the Democracy Solution series. We started this Democracy Solution series following our annual Democracy Solution Summit, which we host every March. It's a 3-day event, and we have fabulous women from across the country and from both the democracy reform space as well as the women's representation space come together to talk about the ways that we are all working together to increase women's political power. And following that event this year, we decided that we were going to launch a monthly webinar series to dive a little bit deeper into the topics that we touched upon during that summit so that we don't have to wait a year to have these important conversations with fabulous women experts in the field. So tonight we are gathering at a genuinely important moment in the 2026 election cycle. The primaries are already well underway, and the data is starting to tell a story about where women stand in this critical election year. According to the Center for American Women in Politics, which I will add is the gold standard for tracking women's representation in elections and whose research grounds everything we'll be discussing tonight, we are seeing a mixed picture emerge from the primaries held so far in terms of women's political power and representation. So there are some real bright spots. That's why we're excited to have Scylla here tonight in New Mexico. The former Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, she's won the Democratic nomination for governor, and if successful in November, she would become the first Native American woman governor in United States history. So we all have our eyes on that race. And she will be joined on what will be the 8th all-woman gubernatorial ticket in U.S. history as well by current Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver, who won the Democratic nomination for lieutenant governor. So we have Scylla here, and she can speak to the wins also down ballot and how New Mexico is looking with the primaries. The other states that we're looking at, in Iowa, women make up 50% of the major party nominees for the U.S. House, which is a remarkable figure. And in California, a record number of women filed as candidates this cycle. And we had extended an offer for our fabulous partner, Susanna Delano from Close the Gap, California, to join us. But she is also actually today hosting a California recap of the primaries. So we will be sharing the video of their presentation alongside ours so that you can learn a little bit more about what's happening in California in terms of women's representation as well. So while we just went over a couple of wins, this picture is not uniformly encouraging, unfortunately. In Montana, no women advanced as the major party nominees for the U.S. House, and no woman has served in Congress from that state since 1943. We will also just give a little shout out that Jeanette Franken was from Montana, and her birthday is actually tomorrow. So we will be doing some birthday recognition for her on our social media. So stay tuned for that. And we also are looking at, progress that's needed for the U.S. Senate in New Jersey, New Mexico, or South Dakota. No women, unfortunately, filed as candidates there. And why we at Represent Women focus on these primary outcomes and the women that are running or not running is because there are structural barriers that are shaping these outcomes in terms of who gets to run, who makes it on the ballot, and who ultimately wins. And so that's exactly what this conversation is all about tonight. That is why we are here. We're trying to understand how we can remove some of these structural barriers to encourage women to win and also enable them to be successful in these campaigns. For us, the primaries are not just a procedural step. They're where representation is won or lost, and the rules that govern them matter enormously for women. So with that, I'm excited to dig in with our incredible speakers who are joining us tonight. So I will go around and introduce our three fabulous experts. We first have Beth Hladick, the policy director at Unite America. She was one of my colleagues when I was at UA in the past. Beth, do you want to share anything tonight to kick us off just on who you are and why you joined us?
Sure. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lana. I'm so grateful to be here for this conversation. I'm Beth Hladick, as Lana mentioned. I've been studying root causes and potential solutions to polarization at the Unite America Institute for the past 6 years. And I really focus my research on studying primary elections. So excited to share some new data and insights with you all today.
Well, thank you, Beth. So excited to hear from you on these insights from this cycle. And next we have Bianka Emerson. Bianca is the president of the Colorado Black Women for Political Action. I've had the privilege of spending quite a lot of time with Bianca over the last month at different events and convenings. She just spoke at a Represent Women luncheon that we hosted in Denver, where I normally am located. I'm in New Hampshire today. So, Bianca, do you want to share a little bit about yourself to our audience?
Hi. First, thank you so much to Represent Women for this opportunity to come with you all. I have worked in electoral politics for over 20 years. I've worked on 3 presidential campaigns, mayoral campaigns, a couple of ballot measures here in Colorado. So I'd like to say politics is what I do, and I absolutely love it. And I will say shout out to me. I'm actually a candidate for RTD, our Regional Transportation District, for District B. So I'm doing politics today. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You are so welcome, and thank you for sharing your background. And I'm excited to hear how your campaign goes. So the last but not least, certainly not least, is Scylla Axel. She is also a dear friend that I've worked with on many a project, and she is a powerhouse in New Mexico and in Albuquerque. I'm going to shout her out. She won an award for 40 under 40 for Albuquerque, so we're in the presence of a rock star right here. But Scylla is the executive director of NM Voters First, and she was instrumental in helping open the primaries in New Mexico. So, Scylla, if you want to speak a little bit about your experience in this political space and why you're here today, give you the floor.
Thank you, Alana and Represent Women, for hosting us tonight and for always being so friendly and inviting us to come and speak. Hi, everyone. My name is Scylla. I'm a first-generation American. I have lived in New Mexico for over 10 years now, and it's the longest I've lived anywhere, so I get to say I'm from here. And I've been in this work for about 4 or 5 years at this point. And as Alana mentioned and Beth mentioned, we worked really, really hard to pass open primaries. It was a 10-year battle. I was not there for the full 10 years. I was there towards the tail end, and it was not easy, and I'm really happy that we were able to accomplish it. And now we get to see the fruits of our work with the results that I'm really excited to talk about tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to get into these results. So, without further ado, I will kind of jump right into our conversation. So, I'm going to kick off by starting with Beth. For anyone who is joining us who might be newer to this issue, Beth, could you give us a quick picture of the primary problem nationally? We talk a lot about the primary problem, but people might not know what it is or why it matters or what does it specifically mean for women who are trying to get on the ballot. So I will give you the floor.
Thank you. I just want to say before I get started that I really appreciate the way that Represent Women approaches this work, primarily because when we talk about structural reform and barriers that women face in running for office, there is not one solution that solves all of the problems. So while we'll be talking about primary reform a good bit tonight, I want to just emphasize that I appreciate how Represent Women takes a very holistic view of the barriers and viable solutions. So let's talk about the primary problem. When we say the primary problem, what I mean is a really simple but consequential dynamic. So in most districts, the primary is really the election that determines who holds office. And that's because about 92% of our congressional seats right now are safe for one party. But the kicker is that only a very small slice of voters participate in that election. So those voters tend to be older, wealthier, and whiter. So it's not that much of a surprise that our Congress reflects those demographics. In 2024, we found that a shocking 87% of the US House was effectively elected by just 7% of Americans. And this year, the early numbers suggest we're on a very similar path. So I actually have data right now that's fresher than this graphic that I shared yesterday, so I'll share it with you. But basically, 24 states have held their congressional primaries so far, and already 40% of the House has effectively been elected by just 3% of voters participating in those safe seats. This is shocking. 32 states have zero competition in the dominant party's primary. So that really denies voters a choice and any other say in their representation. So this is the national landscape. And it matters for women because when the meaningful election is a low turnout party primary, the barriers to running and winning are significant. Candidates are often not speaking to the whole district. They're speaking to a narrow, often more partisan slice of the electorate. They may have to appeal to party insiders, activists, donors, and gatekeepers before they even get to the broader electorate that they seek to represent. So this can shape who's recruited, who's viable, who gets the resources, and who even gets considered. As I mentioned, there is not one solution to this problem, but primaries and the structure of our primaries, I think, is a core part of the system. It's one that I think is deserving of much further research scrutiny. And if we care about representation, I think we should really care about whether our elections give all candidates, including women and candidates from underrepresented communities, a real opportunity to compete. So that's the frame I want to bring. Again, thanks for having me and look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you so much for explaining the primary problem, Beth, because it is certainly a really big problem that we are experiencing. And we can get into some of the solutions in the later on in the conversation. But I also wanted to point out that you just put out a report at the end of last year that looked at women and how they fared in different types of primaries. So we see that the primary problem is exacerbated by closed primaries. You looked at open primaries, but I would love to kind of dive into that. You found, at least in your last election report, so this might be a little outdated data, but that's okay, that more than half of party primaries feature no female candidates at all, and that women made measurable gains under all candidate primaries, particularly Republican women and women in state legislative races. So just wondering if you could speak to what do you think is driving that? And what does it tell us about the relationship between primary structure and women's representation?
Yes. I will start with the top line here, which is that the research, it's from 2018 to 2024, and it suggests that when we compare party primaries to open all candidate primary states, women compete at least as effectively under all candidate primaries as they do under party primaries. And in some contexts, to your point, they appear to do better. And we can frame this around three clear research questions, I think. Our first question was, do more women run? The second question is, were women more competitive? And third, of course, did more women win? So on the first question of whether or not more women run, the answer is yes, especially in state legislative races. So we find that there were more women candidates present in open all candidate primary types compared to party primaries. And I think really what this suggests is if you put all candidates on the ballot and allow all voters to participate, women are more likely to be present in the candidate pool. And at least voters are less likely to see a ballot with no women at all. On the competitiveness question, the gains were not enormous across the board. Again, we can't say that the primary type alone is what is driving women's competitiveness. But in state legislative races, especially, I said women made up a larger share of the candidate pool, and they also made up a larger share of the candidates advancing from the primary. And then my last question here was, do more women win? And this is where I think the findings are especially interesting. So in congressional races, women made up 34.7% of the general election winners in states using all candidate primaries, compared to 25.7% in states using party primaries. And the gains are similar in the state legislative context. So I want to be very cautious about overclaiming. Like I said, this is not proof that the system alone caused those gains. But I think it's really an interesting finding and something that we want to continue to study. There were also interesting gains for Republican women, specifically in state legislative contests. I think there's some really helpful political science research that suggests Republican women specifically may be perceived as more moderate. So in a party primary context, they can be disadvantaged. But in an all-candidate primary, a Republican woman who might be perceived as more moderate is potentially more likely to be successful because in an all-candidate primary, you have to appeal to a broader coalition, including independents, moderates, cross-party voters, in a way that you don't in a closed party primary. So I'll stop there. Hope that was helpful. I can drop the link to our Institute report in the chat for anyone who wants to get into the weeds.
Yes, that would be amazing. And maybe we can circle back toward the end because you obviously did a lot of work and you're from Alaska, and just maybe talking about the Alaska example, since it's an all candidate primary, but it's paired with top four and RCV, and we've seen women just really excel in Alaska. So I will pivot back to you about the Alaska concept later. And I'm going to move next over to Scylla. We've taken this moment to really look at the national landscape and the primary problem through Beth, but we want to jump into a couple state examples. So New Mexico just made history with its first ever semi-open primary, which Scylla, you're a huge driver on getting over the finish line, which allowed independent voters to participate for the first time. So Scylla, what was this primary season like on the ground? What does this moment mean for the state? New Mexico has done incredible for women's representation already. And so just kind of what was your takeaway from the primary that just happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were actually in sort of a pickle on the ground because we had our Secretary of State's budget get cut in half last year. And so this legislative session, we were like, hey, before elections start, we got to lobby to get some more money in the Secretary of State bucket. And we were not 100% successful, but they were slightly more funded this year, but they definitely did not have enough money to do the regular pre-election work that the Secretary of State's office does, which includes sending mailers to all the registered voters, in particular the independents, to let them know that this is the first election where they can vote without having to change their voter registration. And so because of that, our coalition had to step up and level up our game and do a statewide implementation. And it was not as challenging as I thought it would be, to be completely honest, because we have amazing partners that already do amazing work. And, we had weekly, monthly meetings to, collaborate and get on the same page and be consistent with what we were saying to voters. And so we had a huge statewide coalition. You could visit yourvotenm.com, and I'll also drop it in the chat when I'm done. But that was our statewide coalition. We had unions, we had all kinds of diverse organizations that already do amazing work in the community, adding a sentence or two in their mailers and newsletters saying that, like, hey, if you're an independent, you can vote now. And New Mexico Voters First, we did specific independent voter targeting in districts where we thought that there weren't like competitive races where the candidates didn't need to do the outreach on their own to the independents. So we highlighted 5 specific counties in New Mexico where there were a lot of independents and not much competition. And we sent mailers there, hoping that it got to the right people, because you never get feedback from mailers, right? You just send them and hope for the best. But we had really good engagement on social media. We had radio ads in rural areas because we know that those folks listen to the radio. We had TV ads, we had like Hulu and YouTube ad, like anything you could imagine as to how to reach people, we were doing it. We even targeted specifically the Navajo Nation, which is partially in New Mexico, and did some radio ads there in their native languages. So we were all encompassing, and we worked really, really hard with the coalition. And aside from the coalition, we also worked with candidates themselves. So I sent out a survey to every single candidate running for every single office. And usually, we get about 20% response rates to our endorsement surveys. But because this was not an endorsement, and because this time, instead of targeting just the legislature, we targeted everybody, like county commission, school board. I don't care what you're running for. I need you to talk to independent voters. And I think that helped a lot as well. And even in certain races, you saw the difference that independent voters made. Like one incumbent was unseated, and that was because I know that that candidate who unseated this incumbent was doing the work to do outreach to independents and sending specific mailers to independents and whatnot, and so on and so forth. And another thing I want to talk about regarding this election in particular was It was the second highest turnout in New Mexico for a statewide race. And our turnouts don't tend to be really high to begin with, but this was really important because obviously the governor's race was on the ballot. And I thought really hard looking at the results. I was like, when I was trying to pass this bill a year or two ago, there was a lot of people who didn't want to vote yes because they thought New Mexico independents were conservative or moderate or, just labeling people. But what it turned out to be is that New Mexico independents were more progressive than these people thought that they were. Because as you mentioned, Alana, earlier on, is that Deb Haaland won the primary nomination for the governor. And there were some candidates that were like, ooh, I'm going to turn all these people independent, and then they're going to pick my ballot, and then they're going to do this and that. And strategic voting, as we know, just doesn't happen. And I think that we need more people's awareness that that just doesn't happen and that primaries are really important, as Beth was mentioning, because now, because we're a blue state, because of gerrymandering, because of XYZ, we're probably going to get a Democratic governor who's probably going to be Deb Haaland, who won the Democratic primary, right? So just to put that out there. Additionally, I think that Republican voter turnout this year in New Mexico was low because they didn't have many candidates on the ballot. Most of their candidates were write-in, and I think that was a turnoff for a lot of Republicans and potentially conservative-leaning independents to turn out because they didn't really think that there was much to do on the ballot.
And from our conversations prior to this, we've been looking at trying to figure out how many women in New Mexico are independents. But the turnout for women was incredibly high overall in this election. I think Perry sent over the data to me. I can pull it up if needed, but it was like near 50%, it looked like, of women in the turnout. And so it made up a huge percentage of those that actually did cast a ballot. So we'll be very interested to see how that demographic can further be broken down into how many women were enfranchised. But based on these numbers, it looks like there was a significant percentage of them that were women who were enfranchised in this election. And do you want to just quickly take a second to explain? Obviously, you have an incredibly high number of women in your state legislature as it is. On our gender parity index as of the last year, your state legislature scored a 14.8 out of 30. And so you have 54% of seats held by women in New Mexico. It's only one of 5 states where the lower house has achieved or surpassed gender parity. What are your feelings for this election? Is that going to stay on track for women to hold that percentage of seats? And I know that there's also a legislative pay initiative going forth, which I think if you want to just quickly talk about the pay structure, those are the last 2 things that I will pepper you with.
Absolutely. So New Mexico, unfortunately, is the only unsalaried state legislature in our country. They get per diem. It's very small. Someone like me could not afford to be an elected official at the state level here. It costs about $10,000 to just exist in Santa Fe, which is our state capital, during the legislative session. So it's a very burdensome and unequitable process. And so we passed a bill this year. Actually, it was a constitutional amendment. It'll be on the ballot in November, where that is my priority focus, is to pass this ballot measure right now. And there are some dark money groups that are trying to get in our way. So if you know of any support, please send them our way because we need all the help we can get to get this done. As you guys know, salarying our legislators a fair wage would enable a lot more women to be able to run and be in office. A lot of people who run for office get elected and then they realize they're not getting a dime and they're like, well, I'm not doing this anymore. And then they go home to feed their people at home. So unfortunately, it's a bad burden. But with reforms like modernizing our legislature through salaries, with reforms like semi-open primaries, potentially ranked choice voting down the line, I think that we would see very quickly a supermajority of women in the state of New Mexico because, like you said, Alana, we already have a majority female-led legislature, and I think that these reforms would only empower that and make it happen much faster.
We definitely agree with that assessment. These are the structural levers and that enable change and for us to see more women have a seat at the table. And we have actually done our own report on legislative modernization and pay for legislators. So if someone from our team, or I can add it as well, wants to add that to the chat, I would highly suggest people check that out to learn a little bit more about what our data says on why those reforms are so needed. So I will leave you, Scylla, for a second. I will come back with a couple other things before we close out, but I don't want to leave Bianka hanging. Thank you for being so patient for the first little bit of today. But Bianka, you have obviously done incredible work in Colorado. You spent nearly 2 decades working in electoral politics, as you said, from gubernatorial and mayoral campaigns to your current role, now leading Colorado Black Women for Political Action. And you are also running now. So you have that first hand on the ground experience for a position. But I would like you first to just talk about your primary's not happened. Colorado's primary is coming up pretty quickly. It's the end of the month on June 30th. So could you tell us briefly what your organization is focused on this cycle? What are you looking at most closely? And if you'd like to chat about your own experience during this political season, the floor is yours to go in any avenue from there.
Well, I don't have a primary, so thank goodness I'm good to go. But I will say that the wonderful work we do at Colorado Black Women for Political Action started about 50 years ago. We were founded by the first African American female state senator, Gloria Tanner. And so the work that we do is really focusing on policy and legislation that impacts Black Coloradans. So we always have a theme each year. Our theme this year is Forward Together, Power, Possibilities, and Policy. And so the whole point of having that is, today we live in a very divided country. And so we really need to come together, forward together. So coming together in that unity can really produce power, and that power can turn into policies that can bring change. And so what we're doing is focusing on 2 things really through this process. Number one, we're watching Congressional District 1 because we have an opportunity to elect a Black woman in that space. And I think that's important given what happened with the Supreme Court decision and the Voting Rights Act. So if we can help, increase the Congressional Black Caucus from Colorado, which is probably unheard of, we can do that. So that's an opportunity there. And then also, second thing is we're watching the gubernatorial race very closely because in 2024, we passed the Justice for Black Coloradans bill. And what that bill did was create, the requirement was that it would create a racial equity study. And the racial equity study will research past harms of Black Coloradans. Even though Colorado wasn't a slave state, it was the home of the KKK. So people don't consider racism beyond the South and maybe back east. And so what we're doing with that bill is doing research in 4 specific areas: health, education, economics, and social justice. So in a nutshell, you can look it up at Senate Bill 24053. So in a nutshell, after the research has completed, and they'll be completed this year, I was a part of that bill. I was a consultant on passing that bill, and now I work on the commission because the commission guides the research. That research, once it's complete, is supposed to go to the governor, and then the governor's new administration, which we will have shortly in November, will look at that research and see what reparative harm is possible. So if we don't have the right governor in place in Colorado, all of that work will be for naught. So there are 2 basic things that we're watching during this season.
Well, that is incredibly helpful information. And please keep us informed if we can share out any updates as the season continues on where things have landed and if our followers can support in any way. I know we have a lot of folks from Colorado in our network. And as a local, let me know. But I wanted to also jump in to chat a little bit about the assembly and signature process, because it's a process I actually learned a lot about recently. Beth, Bianka, and I were at a Courageous Colorado event in Leadville last week. It's crazy. It's only been a week. But yeah, we were there last week and we learned about the Colorado the primary paradox, in which it's a very accessible election process where you can go and drop off your ballot wherever there. It's very easy to cast a ballot, but getting onto the ballot, now it's a whole different story. It is incredibly challenging. So in Colorado, candidates qualify for the primary ballot by either winning at least 30% of the vote at a district level assembly or by collecting the required number of petition signatures. You can do one or the other or a hybrid route in Colorado. And so Bianka, I wanted to ask, from where you sit, how does this dual track system create barriers for women, especially Black women, considering federal or statewide office? And what would a more accessible path to the ballot look like, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, the dual system was actually designed to provide multiple pathways to the ballot, but in practice, both routes can present significant barriers for women, especially Black women who are seeking state and federal offices. The assembly process often rewards candidates who have long-standing political networks, institutional support, and access to party insiders. But some of that is changing because we have some new up-and-coming young progressive, they call them socialist Democrats, who are really changing things. But for many women and candidates of color, particularly Black women, who remain underrepresented in elected office, those networks have historically been limited. So winning 30% of an assembly requires significant time, resources, relationship with activists and delegates who may not reflect the diversity of the broader electorate. So the petition process, of course, is the other option, and that is often presented as an alternative, but it creates a different barrier. And it can be very expensive. So collecting thousands of signatures across a large required paid circular, you have to have staff, volunteer, a good volunteer infrastructure, and substantial amount of money. I don't have that many signatures to get, but it still takes a lot of resources, and I still have a lot of money. I still have to raise a lot of money to get the small amount of 250 signatures that I have. But I have to get. But candidates from communities that have been historically excluded from wealth and political donor networks often face a much steeper climb. But also we have to include the independent factor in that as well, because when you're getting signatures, you're usually getting them from parties, party affiliation. So over half of Colorado's independent. So that's a different barrier also to gathering signatures. So I think for Black women, those barriers are compounded by the reality that we are often asked to prove our viability before even receiving that support and those resources and endorsements that other candidates are given just from the outset. So a more accessible path to the ballot would focus on expanding participation and reducing the influence of insider networks and financial barriers. And that can include lowering the signature threshold, because right now it's like 1,500, modernizing the signature collection, increasing transparency in the assembly process, and creating opportunities for broader voter participation earlier in the nomination process.
I think that is a great assessment on the different paths we can take. And I appreciate you raising the independence piece, because what shocked me when I was hearing this data last week is that while 50% of Coloradans are independents, when you break it down further and apply the gender lens to that statistic, 47% of women in the state of Colorado are independents, and they are effectively barred from participating in this ballot access process because they are not able to sign any of these petitions for folks to get on the ballot. And they are also blocked from the assembly process. So they can't make up that 30% to get a woman over the threshold to be on the ballot either. So that is a huge barrier that we are seeing. And Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, or Bianka, I believe that for state and federal offices, you need to not just go to one district or two to get signatures, but you need to go to 8 districts and get a percentage from each in order to also qualify for the ballot. So when we think about women, if you are a mom, if you are a single mom, having to go around the state, it's a big state, to 8 districts to get signatures, and the time and investment there, especially since Colorado doesn't have campaign funds for childcare as a policy that is passed. And so it also creates additional barriers for women on that front. And I think that barriers for federal and statewide office that we're seeing, where you have to go to 8 districts and you have women barred for being independents, perhaps leads to the fact that when I'm looking at the gender parity index data for Colorado, for US Congress, it's a 5.6 out of 30. And for statewide executive, it is only a 5.7 out of 30. So they really lag behind in those figures. We are far from parity there. So the solutions, Bianca, you proposed could have some real tangible impacts in the state, especially for women.
Well,
And
you do have to get signatures from your district, but that can be a problem too, because the districts can be so big.
large.
Sometimes people don't know if they live within that district as well. So, yeah.
That is another barrier. And I will quickly jump over to you, Beth. Do you want to also just quickly talk about, you did a great report specifically on Colorado, on the Colorado primary problem. So if there is any data or any insights you'd like to share from that that are relevant, no worries if you don't feel it's helpful here, but I wanted to open the floor just in case.
I'll just say quickly that we take that national framework and we can apply it at the state level too. So we do some research on state legislative primary problems. And in 2024, despite Colorado having, to your point, Alana, many great gold standard election processes, only about 13% of eligible voters in Colorado effectively determined the entire composition of the state house. And about 18% of Coloradans determined determined the U.S. House delegation. So again, really stark numbers. You know, when primary turnout, even with a very accessible voting system, still averages around 20 to 25%. We're having about 1 in 4 voters pick their representation. So first and foremost, like participation in the primary election is so important. If we cannot yet imagine new reforms, like just driving awareness that like this is the election that matters in so many districts, I think goes a long way towards helping educate voters and ensure that they know when and where to show up or where to return their ballot and things like that. So yeah, there's lots of work to do. I loved some of the recommendations Bianca shared.
And I'll just quickly add to what Beth was saying. The current city council in Denver was selected by about 23% of eligible voters in Denver.
Yes, we really need majority winners, and that's where some of our solutions, like ranked choice voting, really help us get there, which is why we champion solutions like ranked choice voting. And one other thing I'll just add on the Colorado primary in particular, we were chatting with Amber McReynolds, who's on our board, and she is a fabulous election administrator and expert in that field. And she had also mentioned that the timing of primaries is actually something we should really pay attention to. The late June primary, June 30th, creates an additional challenge, especially for college students. Many of them have already left the state of Colorado by the time the election comes along. They may have moved out of their dorms by the time the early ballots have been sent. And then they may return to states where their primary has already passed. And so this also creates a barrier where, by no fault of their own, students are not able to participate in these primary elections, and a lot of women students also then wouldn't be able to cast a ballot in a state where they spend most of their time. So as we think about how we can also take reforms further, even looking at the timing of these elections is important. So I touched a little on ranked choice voting a second ago, and so I had said I was going to circle back to Beth, and I also want to add this question for Scylla as well. So Scylla, to start with you, ranked choice voting is already used in some New Mexico cities, and you are working through New Mexico Voters First to expand it further. Hopefully one day it will be statewide. So at Represent Women, our data shows that women win at higher rates in ranked choice voting elections than in winner-take-all systems. And women hold 55% of city council seats compared to roughly 25% nationally when you have a ranked choice voting election putting them there. And so given what you've seen on the ground, how do you think expanding ranked choice voting across New Mexico could help build on the progress that you're already seeing for women in this cycle and in the cities that have implemented ranked choice voting previously?
I mean, I think it would absolutely increase the chances of women, especially locally, getting elected. We've been really honing in on Albuquerque, trying to get ranked choice voting here. As folks might not know, but we have 3 major cities. It's Santa Fe, Las Cruces, and Albuquerque. Albuquerque has the highest number of residents compared to the other 2 cities, and Santa Fe is the capital. Santa Fe and Las Cruces have ranked choice. They love it. They love using it. Their county clerks both ran for Secretary of State. One of them won. So regardless of who was going to win, we were going to be happy about it because they would have been pro-reform. And in Albuquerque, it's really the system is basically set for us to fail. Unfortunately, we have a conservative majority city council, including some Democrats that are not pro ranked choice, even though they're women of color, and we've been sending them documents that prove this would help them. I don't know. And the ballot, we do have municipal ballot initiatives. We don't have statewide ballot initiative in New Mexico, but municipally, we've been considering running a ballot campaign. The sad part of that is that it obviously requires a lot of money, but we also have only 60 days to collect about 30,000 signatures, and that is no joke. And so we're genuinely considering, rallying the troops just like we've been doing for the past couple of years and maybe taking a shot at it next year. So again, if you know of support for that, please let me know because we need all the support we can get in that end. And we really do think that once Albuquerque adopts ranked choice, that it would be easier to pitch this at the statewide level, like let it simmer for a couple of years, let people use it so it's not people can't use the argument of, oh, it's too confusing and our voters won't get it. And so, that would be completely turned off because 3 of the major cities in the whole state would be using it already. And we've even started considering furthering our reach of expanding ranked choice to northern New Mexico, where we have Taos, which is a artsy city where people live, and their politics is really interesting, but very progressive. So we're assuming that cities like Taos would also be interested in talking about ranked choice. We're also considering, school board and whatever in Albuquerque to see if little by little we can make movements towards forcing people to accept it as this is something that's coming and you can't avoid it. But I really do think, once we get it done at some level, we can get it done at the state level, and that would obviously empower more women to be able to be elected, as the data shows.
Yeah, and speaking of the data showing wins for women at the state level, I will pivot over quickly to Beth. Alaska is the only state in the nation to have an all candidate primary followed by a general election where 4 candidates are on the ballot and they are decided by a ranked choice voting system. And it was adopted in 2020. It was used in 2022, 2024, again now in 2026. And it has contributed to a pretty massive surge in elected women, and Alaska becoming the only state in the nation where a coalition of Republicans, Democrats, and independents run both chambers. And so I just would love if you wanted to quickly talk about the wins in Alaska and how it's impacted women, from Lisa Murkowski to Mary Peltola, Kathy Giesel. I won't ask you to explain the whole top 4 system in Alaska, but if you want to give a brief highlight, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm a very proud Alaskan for many reasons, and this is one of them. I think one of, actually, it's Sightline. I think Shannon Grimes is here from Sightline Institute. They have a great report about Alaska's system. I can drop it in the chat after I share this with you. But after the system was used for the first time in 2022, more women ran for statewide office that year than in the previous 5 election cycles combined, which is amazing. And at the state legislative level, women won a majority of open seats, which is also really exciting. There's new opportunity for competition. Women enter the race and women win. So really promising. Again, I always say this, we can't say that reform alone is that forcing mechanism. There are many other things that matter, that support women running, winning, and leading. But to your point about leading, Alana, Senator Kathy Giesel was previously primaried out of office to her ideological extreme. She ran and won again in 2022 and holds a leadership position in the Senate. We elected our first woman and first Alaska Native to the U.S. House, which was a historic moment. And we reelected Senator Lisa Murkowski on that same ballot. So we had a Republican and a Democrat. And I think what Alaska system really tells you is A, voters want choice. B, when given a choice, people want to elect women. And I just get so excited when I talk about it because it's so meaningful to me and I think so important. And again, we should continue to study and scrutinize the conditions that really help women succeed under these reformed systems.
I love that, and I think the Kathy Giesel example especially has been one that has stuck with me for now many years. Where when she realized she could appeal to more voters and to a broader constituency, all of a sudden it unlocked her ability to win and then become just this incredible bipartisan effective leader. And we want to see more effective leaders and women leaders be able to actually win these elections and push us in the direction we're trying to go. And for this election, just to give a little bit of a gender perspective, more than half the field is running a gender balanced ticket in Alaska right now. And so we're seeing that women truly are showing up and they are running competitive tickets in Alaska year over year. And so we're excited to keep an eye on the Alaska results, as well as Maine just held their election. We will have more results on how women are looking there, but they also use ranked choice voting in their election system. They have a primary with ranked choice voting, and then we will see whether Susan Collins or others or Shanna Bellows. We've got a whole bunch of things going on in Alaska. So, I mean, not in Alaska, in Maine. So my last question for you, Beth, is we've been talking just about a lot of states today and the state of the primaries. But what are you feeling as you're watching the primaries come in every week nationally? What are the early indicators telling you about if you have any data on women's representation or participation as you're looking at them? And what steps, in your opinion, can states and localities be taking to ensure that every voter, especially women voters, has a meaningful say in primary elections for maybe the next cycle to come?
Such a good question, Alana. As much as the numbers in 2026 are quite bleak, I did look up the Center for American Women in Politics, a great resource, and they had a new stat on their homepage about Democratic women running for U.S. House seats. And I believe in the 2026 midterm so far, we're at a historic number who have filed to run for House seats. So candidate filing deadlines, of course, elections are not yet complete, but I think it's exciting to think about trends and more women filing to run for office is an important first step. I think another thing to be mindful of, we care a lot about primary type here at United America, and we look at closed primary specifically. 17 states exclude independents from participating in these often very consequential elections just based on their voter registration. And I actually looked at some cooperative election study data recently and found that women now make up about 42% of independents nationally. So if you are an independent woman in a closed primary state, you're effectively locked out from the consequential election. So I am looking forward to continuing the research that we're doing. Again, we track this on a weekly basis, and I think it'll be important to put together a summary about participation, competition, women that win, and continue to analyze the data. And again, continue to scrutinize the systems that are either increasing women's competition and representation, and also where they're still facing barriers. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation. It was very timely, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all.
Of course. And if you want to also add Beth, the primary problem page to the chat so that people can watch as the number ticks up in percentage already decided, and probably will not tick up significantly in the number of folks that are actually electing that percentage. It's always a sad day when you see one going up a lot and the other little marginally. So I will finish up by just giving a question to the whole group. So for the women's representation advocates in our audience who may not yet see primary reform as central to their work, what do you want them to take away from this conversation today? Or what is something that they can be doing in their communities? We always like to leave with a call to action, as we know that this is a very active group of women, and how we can give them some guidance. We always love to do that. So I will let it popcorn to whoever would like to go first.
I would just say that specifically for Black women, Black candidates, in particular, the challenge is not a lack of leadership or talent or community support. It's really navigating systems that were not originally designed with with our participation in mind. And so I'm also the founder of Political Direct Her, and I created that to provide more resources for Black women in the spaces of in electoral politics, because so often, the Black women are most consistent voting Black, but that participation and energy does not translate into policy. So we have to be able to provide more resources for Black women to run, and often make sure that we have Black women placed into key positions so that the policy reflects the energy that we have at the ballot box.
Thank you, Bianca. Priscilla, do you want to jump in next?
Sure. I think my number one suggestion would be if you care about literally anything, any of those issues can be solved through changing the processes of how people get elected. And so if you're like passionate about climate and you get involved in a climate organization and you're feeling like things aren't moving and everything's stalled, it's because of the way we elect people and how people make policies. And for that reason, I'm not saying leave your climate group and come join us, but I'm saying spare some time for groups like New Mexico Voters First, like Represent Women and Unite America, and just see how you can contribute and volunteer and donate, because local organizations make the most impact in our communities. And I'm sure there's some form of League of Women Voters chapter or Common Cause chapter that's already working on similar issues. And if they're not, then you can be the one to say, hey, I just attended this really cool webinar and they talked about election reform. What are you guys doing? And if you're not doing anything, take charge and call us and say, hey, what do I do now? Because when I was thrown into this work, I didn't know what I was doing. And a lot of people like Beth and Alana were there to help me and guide me through this treacherous process of passing a bill. But yeah, like there's so many opportunities, and we would love for you to get involved. And if you're already involved and your friends are like, I don't know what you're talking about every time you talk about stuff like this, get them involved too, because the more the merrier. And I think that movements come from community, and we have a huge community.
I could not have said that better myself. And I just feel so lucky to have worked alongside or to be working alongside of all of you, to have now years that I've spent with you all. And one aspect of our work that we love to promote as well, that I know Scylla, Beth, Bianca, you better be on our Women's Expert in Democracy directory. If not, I'll be adding you ASAP. But if you are looking to connect with women in your community who are experts in a democracy and representation, we have a fabulous women's expert catalog online, and we also have we have a program called the Women's Power Collaborative, which I believe everyone here is also part of. And that allows you to connect with women who are leading the charge across the country. And we have a closed group where you can share ideas and hear updates in your region. And so it's a fabulous tool. I don't believe it exists anywhere else other than through Represent Women. So I would highly encourage anyone listening in, or if you know people in your community who really want to become more engaged in this work, for them to sign up for our Women's Power Collaborative. We are able to provide great resources there. And the form, I believe, Cynthia may have just added, I had it queued up well for our website page. So please check that out. Reach out if you have any questions about the Women's Power Collaborative. And if you are available, we have a couple great lunch and learns coming up this month. So please keep an eye out on our email list for those. One will actually be happening next Thursday. So, Beth, before I cut everything off, anything else you'd like to add just on what people should? I know you've given us a lot of takeaways, so I think you may have kind of kicked us off with this.
I'll just say +1 to what Bianca and Scylla shared. If you care about who represents you in office, you should care deeply about the rules of how you get on the ballot, the rules that determine who gets to participate, whether or not you actually have a meaningful say as the decline in competitive districts continues. we should all be very tuned in to what's happening in the primary elections because those are really consequential. And as Bianca mentioned, Colorado's is happening on June 30th. But no matter where you are in the US, make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you have your election day on your calendar. And I would just say to stay engaged. I think all of our organizations represented here put out a lot of great resources and learning opportunities. Share them with your network and just yeah, I'm so grateful. This space and these places give me a lot of hope in a world where there's otherwise a lot of doom and gloom. So I'm grateful for the work that we can do collectively together. And yeah, I think that's it.
I'm beyond grateful for the work we get to do collectively together as well. And I'm grateful for the people who've shown up tonight to listen in, to learn more about the primaries and how they're impacting women's representation. And if there are any burning questions, we still have 3 minutes. I won't be able to get to too many questions, but if you have any, and want to either drop something quickly in the chat, or if we have a meeting structure tonight so people can actually unmute themselves. If there's anyone who would like to ask a quick question live, I can take maybe one, at max probably two. So I will leave that up to people in case anyone wants to ask Beth, Bianca, or Scylla something in particular. I'll give it a second or so. All right, no worries if we don't have any direct questions toward the end. If you have questions that pop up, if your primary occurs and you look at some results, or you look at your ballot and you don't feel like there are enough women on it, please reach out to us with these questions and these thoughts, and we will be sure to get back to you any relevant data, any information, any ways that you can further get involved to ensure that these ballots do show women in the future. If they don't, or if you would like to see better turnout for women, there are great organizations in our network that we are happy to connect you with and research to share. And we just love to be thought partners with you. So we are so grateful for everyone being here tonight. And with that, we are just about to hit the hour. So I will let everyone go with a minute to spare. But thank you so much for supporting us and these wonderful women, and for being with Represent Women for the latest edition of our Democracy Solution Series. We will have another Democracy Solution Series actually this month. We're doing 2 this month. So the quick PSA for me is to tune in at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, June 30th for our solution series on safety and the barriers to women's representation. We are seeing, unfortunately, political violence increase in this country. Women are disproportionately affected by these increases in political violence and threats to safety. And so we are bringing together experts from across the field, from research, those that are working on trying to enact policies to prevent harm. And so we'll have a really robust discussion on how we can be working together to address that. So stay tuned for an email from me on how to register for that upcoming webinar. And we hope to see you again at the end of the month. Thank you all. And I will leave it open for any chats and things if people want to throw anything in. But Scylla, Beth, you are not obligated to stick around longer if you don't want to. Thank you for giving us time this evening. And I will talk with you both soon. I'll send you the recording as well as everyone else shortly. Oh, hi, Mike. If you're still there, thank you for coming. Good to see you. All right. I thank you, Holly. And with that, I am going to close down the webinar. Thank you all for joining.